My 5-month-old daughter loves to play peekaboo. And because she loves it, this simple game is now one of my favorite activities. Because when I see her smile, I see the face of God. According to a quick glance at Wikipedia, developmental psychologists theorize that infants' fascination with this game has to do with the development of the ability to understand object permanence, which is the ability to understand that things exist even when you don't see them. Beginning this week in San Francisco, vaccinated adults no longer need to wear masks while outdoors except in large crowds. It occurs to me that we may have all just been invited to play a large game of peekaboo. Wow, you're still here, behind the mask. Hello, neighbor. One feature of the pandemic that I find to be particularly unsettling is the loss of seeing each other's faces. Perhaps those who have experienced loss of vision or who have never had eyesight have more wisdom to offer on this, but I find walking around our city and not seeing faces to be rather disquieting. Jewish thinkers regularly contemplate the human face as a sight of the sacred. In the Torah, after his death, Moses is described as the only prophet who ever knew God panim el panim, face to face, which we could understand to be a comment on the kind of intimacy that Moshe and God had with one another. Indeed, earlier in the Torah, God warns Moses that nobody may see God's face and live, suggesting that the very act of gazing upon the face of another constitutes a certain condition of vulnerability. As I was walking in the city after the rule changed and noticed how many people remain masked, I started to think about this object permanence. On the one hand, it seems we have all acted with great faith over this past year, trusting that behind the surgical masks, scarves, and shields was a human face, the face of an other. On the other hand, I wonder if we've developed some sense of fear of exposure. Exposure to COVID-19, yes, but also exposure to one another, to vulnerability, after this year of living behind masks and walls and screens. What will it mean for us to show our faces again, to become exposed? How will each of us decide when it is right for us to shine our faces upon one another, to lift up our countenance, as the priestly blessing says, upon our neighbors and strangers, friends? Emanu-El Levinas was a French Jewish philosopher whose life spanned the bulk of the 20th century and whose work was important in both secular and Jewish life. Among his most important contributions to Jewish thought was his theology of the human face. Levinas theorized that a heavenly commandment, a mitzvah, appears to us in the face of another human being. That to encounter the face of another human being is, in a way, to get a glimpse of the divine and to be commanded to care for and respond to that face, especially the face of an other who suffers. In one of his most famous quotes from his book Ethics and Infinity, he writes, "The first word of the face is 'Thou shalt not kill.' It is an order." Levinas understands the human face to be like a text, like a page of parchment from the Torah, a manifestation of Jewish laws and values that compel us to care for and be responsible for one another. When we see each other, we are exposing our vulnerability and our messy humanity. After years of being apart, after a bitter family feud, when Jacob and Esau are reunited, Jacob looks upon his brother's face and says, "Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God." The idea of exposing our faces again startles some of us, frightens some of us. We're not all ready. For others, it is only liberating, the very thing that signifies that perhaps this devastating pandemic really will turn a corner. We each bring our own pieces to the puzzle of rebuilding public life, and there is not one right way for everyone. And it feels important to include in the conversation that Judaism understands the face to be holy. The tradition asks us to see one another, to show one another our vulnerability. We must continue to wear masks as long as public health officials determine it is needed in all of the settings they tell us to. And also, if the idea of taking off the mask, of exposing your gorgeous punim to the world again, feels overwhelming or even impossible, remember that written upon your nose and cheeks and forehead are sacred and life-affirming words. We will, at some point, God willing, uncover our faces. If you have not yet been vaccinated and you are able to, please get vaccinated. We are counting on you, and especially those who are not able to be vaccinated, to help create conditions in which we can shine upon one another once again. We have this human need, this divinely human need to see the face of the other, to look to our neighbors with the fragility of a smile as we pass on the street. 5-month-olds remind us that there is truly no greater joy than the experience of seeing the face of someone that you have not seen for a while, to gaze upon them, to be filled with the joy of knowing we are not alone, to be reminded that loved ones have been there all along. Shabbat Shalom.